chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
We all belong outside. We're drawn to nature, whether it's the recorded sounds of the ocean we doze off to, or the succulents that adorn our homes. Nature makes all of our lives, well, better. Despite all this, we often go about our busy lives removed from it. But the outdoors is closer than we realize. With All Trails, you can discover trails nearby and explore confidently. With offline maps and on-trail navigation, download the free app today and make the most of your summer with All Trails.
Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the writing is sort of everything, right? Like you can fix plot holes, but if the writing is
so some readers love that, and some readers are like, "But I wanted more of this." So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. On today's episode, I'm very excited to have literary and book-to-screen agent, Booksellers Rising Star 2021, Hannah Weatherill. Hello.
Hello, Jamie. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, really well, thank you.
Well, thanks so much for coming on and chatting with me. Lots to cover. So I thought let's start with a bit about you and your career in publishing. Am I right in thinking that you're with Watson Little now, but you only joined Watson Little this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, about 6 weeks ago. Almost 2 months now. So yeah, still super new. It's a really lovely team and I'm really glad to be here. I've done a few different jobs in publishing. So I started off as a scout. Then I became an agent and then I had a short stint at Penguin doing maternity cover last year when I was looking after their film and TV rights. And then when that finished, then I came back into agenting and ended up back at Watson Little. So it's been good fun to try out a few different things and see some different parts of the industry. I know kind of scouting especially can be one of those secret industry jobs that people don't know too much about. But it's a really good place to start your career because it means that you get to meet loads of agents and editors and get a real sense of what's selling and what's not. And just knowing about all these really tiny micro trends, which are always really super interesting. Like, oh, loads of editors have suddenly got books about witches. So they've seen 4 of them in the last week, so they don't want any more witch books and that kind of thing. And then the next month it might be nuns. Or you can tell when there's been like one big news story and then 2 years later all these writers send you the same book about it, inspired by it. So that was a really good way in. And then I was the fiction agent at North Bank Talent Management I started there in April 2019. I just did their fiction and their children's books for a couple of years, but then our in-house book-to-screen agent left, and because I'd done some scouting for production companies in my last job, I kind of took over their book-to-screen rights as well. Oh, okay. So that's how that slightly odd kind of move happened, but it was a really interesting time in film and TV because there was a kind of sudden boom in film and TV options and producers everywhere kind of scrambling for material. It was kind of at the start of the streaming boom and suddenly Netflix and Amazon Prime and various other platforms were competing. So they all needed material to kind of fill their new channels, and then producers were looking for books and known IP to do that. So that was a really exciting time. And then I'd been at North Bank for 4 years, and the job at Penguin came up, which was their head of media rights for Penguin Random House UK, which was working across all of their divisions on the books that they have the dramatic rights to. Quite often the agent reserves the dramatic rights, but if for quite a few unagented authors and in various other situations, Penguin Random House look after the film and TV rights to certain books. So I went there for a year, partly just to see what it was like inside Penguin, which is always really interesting.
I was going to say that seems like quite a big sort of change of trajectory from the kind of literary scout into literary agent.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the scouting into agenting was the first kind of big leap.
Yeah.
Which was, I knew when I was a scout that I wanted to work more closely with authors, because as a scout you see and read everything and you have a lot of industry knowledge, but then there's unless you you stay a scout for a very long time, there's not really anywhere to put that. You just read the next thing and the next thing, and it's all about being on top of everything and not missing anything for your clients. But you don't get to talk to authors and say, actually, this is where the market is at the moment, and maybe you could, make these editorial tweaks. So I knew I wanted to go and work more closely with authors, and that's what I really enjoyed doing. At North Bank in my first agenting job, I inherited quite a lot of authors. We did commercial fiction largely. I took on a few more slightly upmarket and literary authors as well. And I think because of scouting, my taste is very varied. We always had to, read everything. So,
yeah.
And I've kind of taken that into my agenting career and do a lot of crime and thriller, but also, rom-coms, book club books, literary, coming of age, historical, a bit of everything. And I really like working with authors and especially helping them kind of pivot into different areas. So we had quite a few authors at North Bank that had been with the company for a long time and maybe wrote kind of chick-litty books in the early noughties, which aren't quite where the market is now. So we helped them kind of move into slightly different areas. Or I had a few authors that would write children's books and adult books at the same time, or children's nonfiction, or different ages within children's, or a couple of them pivoted from nonfiction books into fiction. So that was always really fun, kind of strategizing with them and trying to hit on ideas that really worked for the market, but where they kind of weren't sure what direction might work for them next. And I think that's the kind of value add that agents can really help with. So yeah, and it's always it's lovely kind of giving people good news and mentoring them, and it's always much easier, I find, to negotiate on behalf of someone else than for yourself. So it's always nice to kind of be in that kind of helping and mentoring and negotiating position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure spending a year at Penguin, like on the publisher side of things, was you must have learned a lot from, because you've been the other side, right?
Yeah, so I thought that was part of the reason I moved, and I thought it would be a very kind of valuable opportunity to see what those acquisitions conversations actually are. And I worked within the rights department. So there was a very small team of film and TV rights people that I was part of, but their translation rights team is really big, especially when you combine adult and children's, and I worked across both of those. So it was just really interesting to kind of get a sense of what editors are looking for at the moment, and also help them thinking more of a TV way, because quite a lot of authors do get TV deals or film and TV deals now, and they can really help each other in terms of, a new adaptation can really help to promote the book and vice versa. So I think it really helps to be thinking in a kind of 360-degree media way right from the beginning. So yeah, it was a really interesting year, but I think in the same way there, I was literally just doing the book to screen rights, and I missed working directly with authors again. And like I said, talking about that strategy and helping them and kind of mentoring them across their career. So when my kind of fixed contract ended, I was, excited to come back to agenting and start working directly with authors again.
Yeah, and like you said, what you're at Watson Little.
Mm-hmm.
Are you building like a brand new list there?
Yes, I am, which is very exciting. So on one hand, I'm doing the book to screen rights, and they have a brilliant list there anyway. I know, Megan Carroll, and but there's 50 years worth of authors there, and a really brilliant team of agents that, and between us, we kind of cover all genres. So lots of material for me to work with and kind of push out to producers. But then on the book side, yes, I'm growing a brand new list, which is very exciting. It's going to be mostly adult for now, maybe a tiny bit of children's, but I'm not focusing on that at the moment. But adult fiction and non-fiction, which is also new for me, but very exciting. I'm a big fan of kind of narrative non-fiction and memoir, lifestyle, self-help, well-being books. So I'm moving into that space. But on the fiction side, I'll be doing crime and thriller and kind of book clubby upmarket books, which is what I really love doing.
Okay. So I was going to ask you, just kind of like as a general thing, what are the genres that you are going to represent?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm always looking for thrillers. I think on the book side, more standalone than kind of police procedurals at the moment. On the thriller side, I think it's all half about the concept and having a really good kind of different one-line hook that feels really, really fresh and exciting, which I'm sure everyone says. So I hope it's not too... also, obviously not the easiest thing in the world to come up with. So no pressure, but that is what we need, is a new and fresh hook, but also a really strong voice. Funny voices work quite well at the moment. But, just anything that feels very kind of convincing and exciting and really makes you want to read on. But also I think people are looking for slightly different structures. I think Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister worked really well and felt very different because of that kind of Groundhog Day aspect of it. And then also kind of puzzly things like The Appeal by Janice Hallett is always... I like the emails and the WhatsApp groups and that kind of thing, that I think it can work well when it's done in a really great way. But kind of puzzly, authentic thrillers that kind of challenge the reader at the same time, and feel very intelligent and like the author's really kind of thought it through. So that kind of thing. I think I'd say nothing too dark and bleak at the moment as well. And I think that's where the kind of the trend for quite funny thrillers comes in. Because everyone's looking, everything's so bleak generally, that I think everyone wants a bit of escapism even in their thrillers. So that's where you get things like, examples now, like How to Kill Your Family and that kind of thing, just like a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But then outside of crime, I'm quite open to various things. I really like, they all need a really good hook still across everything, but I generally like quite kind of upmarket writing, but with a kind of a commercial angle. So in like the rom-com space, for example, I really like romantic comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld. I love love stories in general. So any kind of big or intimate feeling love story will always be interesting to me, but it still does need a kind of big hook and it needs to feel fresh and exciting. So I really like romantic comedy. I recently read I'm Sorry You Feel That Way by Rebecca Waite, which is a really great book about complex families. And it's about two sisters that aren't talking to each other at the moment, but it kind of opens when they meet again at a family funeral. But it's also the story of their quite difficult mother, and it flashes back to when she was growing up in her marriage and that kind of thing. So it's funny, but it's also very sympathetic to very kind of complicated characters. So any kind of exploration of family dynamics and that kind of thing. I think also that something that feels like it has something to say about the world, whatever that may be, is always really interesting. And I think if that's, talking about different types of relationships or about social issues or, the way we live in various parts of the world today, then that's always interesting. And then I guess I'm looking at a little bit of historical. It's always a little bit more tricky and the market is smaller. So I'll probably only take on kind of 1 or 2 historical authors, and I do get submitted quite a lot of it.
Right.
But in that space as well, it's just things that feel exciting and pacey and have a really good voice and a great setting. Essentially, if that's not too long an answer.
Just that. And I will say, this is on the Watson Little website. In from the other side of it, you have written that you are not the right author for sci-fi, fantasy, action thrillers. So that's a simple one of being like, not this. It's almost an easier way of saying it. Sometimes.
Always helpful. I know fantasy is big at the moment. It is just not for me.
Well, my understanding was that fantasy, obviously romantasy is the big thing at the moment, but traditional fantasy, from what I've heard, is actually quite a difficult sell at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's probably true as well.
I think it's in a weird spot where it's kind of, there's a lot of very popular authors in that space, but they are almost writing enough books that it's very hard for a new author to break into that space. That's kind of the sense I get as a big fantasy reader.
Yeah, I think that's probably very true. It's when you get these massive brands that break out, and when they're so prolific, and which they have to be at the moment to kind of keep the readers engaged.
Well, just to keep up with Brandon Sanderson's
that
output,
too.
Everyone needs to write at least 1 million words a year.
Exactly, but no, it can make it really hard for new authors to break out. And I mean, that's, to be honest, it's the same in rom-coms and romance and thrillers as well, and has been for a long time. So, the bar's very high, but it should never kind of put people off trying.
And I think in terms of what you were saying about what you're looking for, the emphasis being on like the hook is still very important, and you want it to be voiced and stuff. I think a lot of if you're writing within genre, so if you're writing like we say fantasy or romance or like psychological thriller, very, very popular at the moment.
Yeah.
There's so much going on in those spaces that you do need to have a sort of very unique perspective to kind of break through the noise. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, new takes on tried and tested settings, structures, characters are still always really interesting. So you don't have to totally reinvent the wheel. And actually it's useful if there are comparisons that have done well in the market that work in a similar space. So I think, there will always be a space for kind of toxic relationships in thrillers and toxic families and mother-daughters, and equally kind of locked room thrillers. There are like a lot of them around at the moment. But, if you have a really interesting new one, the reason that they work is because the locked room structure like creates tension in itself. Mm-hmm. So it works through a thriller because, it's already built in. It's not about something totally new that completely reinvents the wheel. It's about finding a point of difference and running with that.
It's keeping what fans of the genre like about the genre, whilst adding kind of a new twist or like a new kind of aspect to it, which maybe subverts what they're expecting or just like takes it in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, like I said, building a brand new list. Let's talk about submissions. Always something we like to talk about with agents here on the podcast. And lots of my listeners are writers who will be looking to find themselves an agent, and a huge part of that is the submission process. Yeah. So it is, as of recording this, it is July 2024. You are currently open to submissions.
Yeah.
Watson Little's submission is pretty par for the course. It's a cover letter, 1-page synopsis, and a writing sample, 3 chapters, approximately 10,000 words. When you open up a submission, what order do you go through the parts, and what are you looking for within each of those?
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Yeah, so I read the cover letter first, That's the most useful thing to get a sense of the concept and the hook, and if there is one, which is why the cover letter is useful and important. Then I tend to look at the chapters, because it really, at the end of the day, it is all about the writing. I see quite a lot where the concepts are really great, but the execution doesn't quite stack up. Or alternatively, if it's hard to get a sense of whether there's a great concept in the cover letter, but the writing's really amazing, then hard to say. Obviously, I consider everything carefully anyway, and would always have a look at the writing. And then if it's hard to get a sense of the hook in the cover letter, that's when I tend to go to the synopsis after I've read the chapters. Just so I can see where it's going. And then especially if it's something like a thriller, just to see where the plot goes, and just in case it goes really off-piste at the end. So I'd say each part is important. The writing and the chapters are the most important bit. The cover letter and synopsis are very useful tools to give the agent as much information as possible, which will help us make a decision. At the end of the day, it does come down to the writing and the story and the chapters. But is it useful for me to go into detail on cover letters and that kind of thing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so what I find most useful structure-wise, and also if it's hard to get a balance, isn't it? Because none of this is a rule, and there are lots of different ways to write them. And I wouldn't want writers to get too bogged down in worrying about whether they've written the cover letter right, because at the end of the day, if it just kind of gets the information across, then it functions fine. But I think the most effective way of structuring a cover letter is it's basically in 3 parts. You have say, Dear Hannah, I'm excited to be submitting my novel. This is the title of the novel, roughly this many words. And then you have the brief kind of one-line description or hook. But I think it's really useful to pack into that the setting, the age of the character. So you might say, this is my novel. It's called blah, blah, blah. It's about a 25-year-old woman who gets locked in a room with a possible serial killer. So then I know roughly what to expect in terms of tone and character, and I can start kind of positioning it in my head. And that's just within the first sentence then, so you've really packed a lot in there. And then you do a paragraph or two, which is a slightly longer blurb, all about, you just kind of go into the story in a little bit more detail. It's similar to what you'd see on a kind of book cover or Amazon page. But again, I would try and pack in a reasonable amount of detail. I always think of it like a job cover letter, where you want to say as much as you can in very few words. So I'd really make them kind of work hard, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So, if you pack in the setting, the age, people's relationships in one word, then that's really useful. And in terms of, people always kind of ask about spoilers in the blurb and that kind of thing. And I think you want to get to a place where you set up the context of the book. So in the example from before, it might be that woman X has just broken up with her boyfriend. She's got a new job. She goes in for the first day. Then she gets stuck in the lift. There's one other person in it. And then she realizes that she saw his photo on TikTok and he was, wanted for murder or something like that. Just off the top of my head. So I would aim for maybe kind of 6 or 7 lines, so it sets up the context around the character so we know what to expect, and kind of tonally you can kind of gauge it from that much information. And then you get an idea of what happens, where the tension comes from, and why we want to read on. So in that one, you'd want to read it because you want to find out if she escapes or not, and if he's definitely a serial killer and that kind of thing.
You're not giving the spoiler, you're kind of setting up the question.
Yeah, you're setting up the question.
Yeah.
If there are kind of two levels of conflict, you probably want that twist, and then you might have another big twist coming later on. Mm-hmm. And if that's really important to making the book interesting and different, so if I was querying Gone Girl, for example, then I probably would say in my cover letter, but it switches perspective halfway through, and she's actually not dead after all, because that's what makes the book different and interesting and so great. So I would go to that level of spoiler, which is more than you would do on the book cover, obviously, but it just shows to an agent that there is more in there and they should carry on reading to kind of find out. So that's the kind of blurb. And then you've just got a short paragraph about you. Doesn't have to be super long, just a kind of couple of sentences, just about, who you are, where you live, whether you've done any writing before, what you like doing. I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's just to get a sense of you as a person. And that's all, really.
Do you like to have comparison titles in the cover letter?
Yes, they're quite useful, but only a couple of them. And again, it doesn't have to be very long at all. You could say it in a sentence. You could say this is Gone Girl meets The Girl on the Train, or this would appeal to fans of The Appeal, or Wrong Place, Wrong Time, or something like that. Or if you want to put a little bit more detail, you could say, look, it's the setting of this book with the tone of this book. Okay, just to be kind of clear on why you're comparing them. But it doesn't have to be a really long explanation about why you've chosen each of them. And it's really useful if they're quite recent. I wouldn't get too bogged down on it. I know online there are lots of, supposed rules about comp titles and how they're allowed to be and how big they're allowed to be and that kind of thing. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Yeah. But, in the last 10 years-ish, just because that's where, we just want to have a sense of where it sits in the market as the market is now, not as it was 20 years ago. Right, yeah. And equally, I think it's fine to use a TV or film comp. Like I said before, I think the media world it interacts a lot at the moment. If it's similar to Yellow Jackets or Succession or whatever, that can be really useful in terms of helping us place it as well. Yeah. I would have a book comp alongside it, but I think it's fine to have a TV one too. Yeah, I've heard Bridgerton gets put up as a comp title quite a lot. Yeah, so. But I guess it's good in terms of that you were saying, if you just want to say the setting is this, to use Bridgerton as a reference for a setting would be a pretty quick way to get someone in the headspace that you want them in. Yeah, exactly. And I think it can be really effective, especially if, I think for Bridgerton, I'd expect it to be tonally quite similar to it as well, because that's what makes Bridgerton stand out. Yeah. From other, books set in the same era. So I would make sure it fits in, those kinds of ways. But again, I wouldn't get too bogged down in it. Yeah, for sure. That's great. Really useful for people thinking about or currently submitting to you and I imagine any agents. We'll probably come back to this in a little bit, but right now I'd love to get into something that I know almost nothing about, and that is the other side of your job, the other part of your role, which is the book to screen rights. So, as someone who doesn't really know anything about that, what does it mean? What does it look like to work in that space? Sure. Well, what I do is I spend a lot of time going out and talking to producers in the same way that literary agents go and talk to editors and say, what are you looking at for at the moment? And do you have any gaps on your list for certain stories? Or equally, what are you seeing too much of and what are you not interested in at the moment? So we can get a sense of the trends in TV and make sure we're sending them submissions that are interesting to them, because obviously they get inundated all the time in the same way as editors from, not just from literary agents with book IP, but also with from script writers as well. So the pitching process is very similar to editors. When we've got something good, we just, we send it to them with a cover letter that I would tailor more to TV than I would to book publishing. So I would use more kind of TV comps or film, things that have done really well in the last couple of years. So, I mean, which bit would it be useful to start with? Because I can go into kind of how the deals are structured, or I could go into what producers are, what the kind of TV market is like at the moment.
Let's do the first part. It's like how the deals are structured and stuff.
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about film and TV deals, we talk about options, which is where if a producer is interested in a book, then they make us an offer, and that offer is to option the book for a period of time, which is usually these days about 18 months. And that just gives them the exclusive right for that period of time to do some development work on the book. So that could mean creating a pitch deck and kind of getting an idea together of how they would adapt it, because of course, TV or film adaptations can be very close to the book, or they can be inspired by it and change loads and loads of things. So it's basically unrecognizable. So they can start doing that creative work. They might get a scriptwriter attached, and then they would go out to, the channels, so BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Sky, Netflix, and the other platforms, which are what they call buyers, who are the ones that would kind of commission the programme and give them a lot of funding for it. So they do a lot of that in the first 18 months. And so for that, they would pay an option fee. And the amount for that really varies depending on the book itself and whether it's new or old, or, currently having a massive global publishing deal, or has lots of hype, or if there are lots of US producers involved and Hollywood studios and that kind of thing. They pay an option fee, and we usually build into the deal an extension because, TV takes a really, really long time to come together. So very, very unlikely that it will go from the option deal to being greenlit, which is where the studio or channel goes, yes, this is ready to go into production imminently. This is definitely happening.
Beyond so once it's optioned, for example, if a book is being adapted and it goes into, if you've optioned a book and it's being adapted, it's going into production, do you have any involvement beyond that, or does you and the publisher's involvement, you and the agent's involvement, that kind of ends at the optioning?
It's really case by case.
Okay.
So it depends on what the producer wants, what the eventual channel or streamer wants in terms of their vision for the adaptation. Some producers are very happy to have the author's input, or creatively, and they might attach the author as a consultant or maybe some kind of exec producer role. And in that case, then the author gets a lot more input on, how the work is adapted and, how close it stays to the original. But
would you be the point of contact for the author to talk to the studio?
Yeah, generally I try and manage it in a similar way to an author and the editor's relationship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
we're kind of on hand and we like to know what's going on just in case anything goes a bit wrong, or or if there's a slightly thorny issue. And it's always good for us to be kind of involved in those conversations to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah,
authors it's very almost impossible to get final approval over everything. So the author might have creative input, but they would not be able to veto what happens to it, even if they don't like it or like the direction it goes in.
And that's true even of like super famous authors, because I know Alan Moore famously hates all of his adaptations.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. It's so difficult to see something you've been, something that came out of your head go into a totally different medium and possibly get changed completely. But I think always worth keeping in mind that you really don't get approval over it. And once you sign the rights away, they really can essentially do what they want with it. And obviously we always want to keep a good relationship between the author and the producer. But then the producers are always kind of beholden to the people that are financing their project as well.
Yeah.
So if you do want to see it actually made and out there, then there does need to be quite a lot of flexibility on the author's part. But again, I mean, I've worked with lots of producers that are very open and really like working with the authors. And, you know, if they do take that opportunity to work with the author, then they are getting access to, I mean, in fiction, to the brain and imagination of the creator, which is always really useful. And then in nonfiction, if it's a true story, for example, then they can access, you know, the journalist's or author's knowledge and their research. So really, I think it's a great benefit to them as well. But equally, you know, a producer might come along and say, we really want to option this, but by the way, we would have to relocate it in America or somewhere else, or cut out this character, or actually we want to, it's a book that's set in the 60s, but actually we really want to make it modern day and change this and this and this. And I think the more we can have those conversations up front, so we know about anything really major like that, as far as they can know at that stage, before we do the deal. So if the author's really against it being set in America instead of England, for example, then we can say, well, if you don't want to do it, if we should turn this down, then that's okay. It's your decision. But equally, they might go, well, if there's nothing on the table, nothing else on the table, and we want to, you know, to give it a go, then let's go for it, knowing that that is what they intend to do and that you won't have any control over.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened with Not Dead Yet, which is the adaptation of Confessions of a 40-something F-up, which was obviously set in London in the book, and then the television adaptation is in the US. We're going to come back to, you mentioned that we could talk about what, you know, producers are looking for, stuff like that. We're going to come back to that just because in the interest of time, we're going to go over to the desert island right now.
Great, yeah.
And I will ask you, Hannah, if you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book do you hope that it would be?
Oh, so tricky. I think the one that I've come back to is a classic, modern classic, I guess, which is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. I think partly because I haven't read it for a long time and I've been trying to find it in charity shops for ages and haven't found it yet. So it's just been on my mind and I really want to reread it. But also I think it's just a really beautiful escapist book. I think in the same way as some of the books I was talking about before, like I'm Sorry You Feel That Way or Kind of Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, it's about a complicated family living quite a bohemian lifestyle, which is always quite kind of feels quite aspirational and escapist and lovely. But it's also coming of age. It's also a love story. And that's just, you know, everything that I like in a book. So I think I would go for that.
Well, it's a great choice and very good idea to choose something that contains everything that you would like.
I think
who knows
so.
how long you'll be on this desert island.
Exactly.
Amazing. Yeah, love that choice. Look, I've got some more questions about current trends in the industry and advice for anyone thinking about a career as a literary agent, but that will be in the extended episode, exclusive to my amazing Patreon subscribers. Yeah, absolutely. Great advice, and hopefully people listening, if they're interested in that kind of career path, can take that forwards with them. And that brings us to the end of the episode. So thank you so much, Hannah, for coming on the podcast and telling us all about your experiences in publishing and what you're up to and what you've been doing. It's been awesome chatting with you.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.
And for anyone listening, if you want to keep up with what Hannah is doing, you can follow her on Twitter at Hannah Weath. That's Hannah, Weath. And of course, if you're thinking about submitting to Hannah or anyone over at Watson Little, head over to the website and have a thorough look through the guidelines to make sure that you are crossing all of your T's and dotting all of your I's. To support the podcast, like, follow, and subscribe on your platform of choice and follow along on socials. Join the Patreon for extended episodes ad-free and a week early. And check out my other podcast, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again to Hannah, and thanks to everyone listening. We will catch you on the next episode.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.